Well, The Strain has just wrapped up its first season, and since I did a review of the premiere episode, I thought it was only fitting for me to come back and talk about the first season overall. Now, consider this your spoiler warning, because I am going to be talking about the entire show, up to and including the recently aired season finale. The short, spoiler-free version is that this show became an exercise in frustration for me. Now, I do make an attempt to try and divorce my expectations of what I wish something was and accept it for what it actually is. Now, I don't always succeed in that. I'll be the first to admit that. And I really was unable to remove what I'd hoped this show would be from the final result. But I actually blame the show for that because it repeatedly dangled interesting and unique aspects and plot points to either immediately ignore them or yank them away. Here's an early example of what I'm talking about. The first few episodes did a lot of really good build-up and had a lot of tension around the 4 survivors of the plane disaster that was shown in the pilot. One of them in particular really intrigued me with how it was handled. It dealt with this husband and father, and he came home and he was starting to undergo the physical changes that you would associate with someone becoming a vampire. Now, his wife could tell something was wrong, and she could just sort of sense that it was dangerous. She arranged for her kids to be sent off somewhere safe, but she stayed behind. She stayed behind to try and help him, even as he became clearly, visibly less human and just more unhinged. With his own last bit of humanity, he locked himself in their shed, and she, even after he's locked away and he's not even a semblance of humanity left, she arranges for a neighbor to open that shed so her husband can feed. This is a phenomenal, intriguing, deep, heavy setup. I mean, honestly, it's the sort of thing that could almost support its own series. How far will this woman go for the man that she loves, even though he is clearly not that person anymore? Well, immediately at the start of the next episode, turns out she killed herself, and then the heroes of the show off the husband, and that's it. They move on. And it's just such a waste of an amazing and intriguing setup. I mean, I understand that wasn't the main point of the show. They weren't going to string it along forever, but they set it up and then literally did nothing. It keeps hitting these forks in the road where it could do something interesting and dynamic and unusual, and always opts for the obvious cliched option. If you watch my review of the pilot, you may remember where I talked about Ephraim Goodweather and how I really liked him when he was focusing on the disease and he was working on that, and I was concerned about the family dramatics with his ex-wife and his son taking over his character. Well, take a wild guess what happened. The guy just gets so bogged down in this tired, very obvious line of family drama that pretty much the scientific aspect of his character gets pretty much dropped around the 5th episode altogether, and all he does is argue with the old man who clearly knows what is going on. In fact, the guy points out to Ephraim repeatedly, hasn't everything I said been true? Yes, it has. Only an idiot would keep questioning him. What does this guy keep doing? And speaking of the old man, it brings up another point. This show has got the wrong main characters. The most interesting and dynamic and fun characters by far are Vasily Fett, who's an exterminator. He's just a fun character. He's the guy that is the most enjoyable to watch in these sorts of scenarios, which is that he's not in denial. He's not going to go, oh my God, how could this be happening? He's going to observe what's going on and just roll with it. He's going to do whatever he has to survive. He's not going to question the scenario. He's going to just fight against it right off the bat. And the other really good one is the character of Abraham Satrakian. Now, admittedly, it's a slightly cliche character in a vampire setup. It's Abraham Van Helsing, basically. But he's so well played by David Bradley and given some really phenomenal backstory from his history as a concentration camp survivor that it works. It works really well. And actually, this should have been a wake-up call to the makers of the show, because when your flashback is more interesting than what's going on in the main story, it's a sign that maybe you need to work this up a little bit better. But they're clearly not the main characters. They're always side characters. Our heroes are supposed to be Ephraim and Nora. And Nora is even worse than Ephraim is. She exhausts so much physical and emotional energy trying to save and then shelter her mother with Alzheimer's. I wonder how this little bit's gonna turn out. Exactly how you think it is. And for no particular reason, Nora and Ephraim are occasionally lovers. Why? Because that's just what happens with your male and female leads. That's what they do. No, you don't need to be doing that. It serves no function, serves no point. In fact, they get caught by another character who says, oh, in the middle of a plague, you find time to get busy on the rug? That is exactly what I was asking. In the way the entire infection unfolds, I never felt like I had a really good picture of how this thing was spreading. Because how big or small or where the infection was located within the city of New York completely varied from episode to episode, pretty much just depending on what that episode needed it to be. So you've got some episodes where it seems like the entire city is just overrun with vampires, so you can't get away with them. There's other times they're almost nowhere to be seen. The place is just like a ghost town. And you get no effective sort of bird's eye view, like, oh, there's the heart of the infection, it's spreading out from there. Well, no, it's there, and it's there, and it's, oh wait, but it's not there anymore, because now the heroes are there, and there's no, Another example of just doing the most contrived, convenient style of writing is the limited communications. It's a fairly important plot point that a group of hackers gets hired to just bring down the internet in New York City. Now, setting aside how plausible that even is in the first place, the show is completely inconsistent on how effective it is, because there are times when, if the story needs it, they can't even get a text message to each other. There are other times they're actually able to surf the internet as normal, albeit somewhat slowly, just long enough to get a vital piece of information, then the internet goes down again. This is the absolute epitome of contrived, convenient storytelling. It doesn't even follow any kind of internal logic. Now, again, if you saw my review of the pilot, you may have mentioned that I said Guillermo del Toro, who's one of the creators and directed that pilot, seemed to be ripping himself off a little bit, specifically borrowing from Blade 2. Well, change ripping off a little bit to ripping off wholesale. Really, this story is Blade 2 without Blade. The newly infected vampires are handled pretty much identical to the Reapers in Blade 2, down to the loss of all body hair, the protruding stinger that is used to both feed and infect others. Having vampires function really more like zombies than proper vampires. Heck, I'm pretty sure I even saw some of those vampires doing the sideways Reaper scuttle. And it's not even just with the vampires they're ripping off Blade 2. Remember the UV light bombs? They're back. Sewers infested with massive nests of vampires. Yep, check that off the list too. Now, even if you've never seen Blade 2 and wouldn't recognize all of that stuff that it's ripping off, the show is incredibly repetitive just unto itself. I lost count of how many times the show re-emphasizes the newly infected go after their loved ones. It was made pretty clear by about the 4th episode. This was made very clear. In the first few times it was very effective, but it just keeps hitting that same note again and again and again. Not to mention just the progress of the infection gets played out repeatedly again, even though we've seen the entire cycle by the 3rd or 4th episode. There's another character, Gus. He has like a little bit that's actually relevant in the start of the show, and then he keeps turning up for no clear reason. Well, no, I take it back. The reason is clear. He's going to be important later on. But in the context of this season, the guy serves absolutely no purpose. They keep touching base and keeping tabs on him, but he's not doing anything that's giving us any more information, and he's not a particularly interesting character unto himself. First, we see his friend get infected, and we go through the entire infection cycle with that. And then he gets back to his apartment and his brother's infected. Oh, and his mother's infected too. Oh, and his landlord's infected. Oh, for crying out loud, we've seen it, we get it. Setting aside the mindless horde of vampires, our actual main villains are a bit of a mixed bag too. We've got Eichhorst, who is actually quite effective. He's basically a Nazi vampire. He factors in very well into Satrakian's past and his flashbacks, and the actor just portrays the part very well. And when we see his full vampire look, you know, not trying to pass for human, it's interesting, it's cool, it's creepy, but he's not the main bad guy. The main bad guy is the Master. I mean, the guy's basically just a stand-in for Dracula, first of all. And they were kind of getting away with it until they actually revealed him. Because for at least the first half of the show, probably a little more than that, he's this huge cloaked figure and we don't see a face. And it was kind of intriguing. Then they finally show him to us. And he looks like this. Let that sink in for just a second. I mean, they basically took the vampire design for someone like Eichhorst and did the Saturday morning cartoon version of it. I almost did a spit take and burst out laughing when I saw this thing. It's ridiculous. Look, I'm not enjoying crapping all over this show. I wanted to like it. I liked the pilot. It had such potential, but it does almost nothing with it. And there are a few bright spots. I mentioned Kevin Durand and David Bradley as Vasily and as Satrakian. They're golden. If the show had focused on them primarily, it would have been a million times better already. Sean Astin works well as a very morally compromised character because he's not what you'd expect for that, so he worked. There's some interesting stuff, particularly that's happening in the finale in terms of what we're learning about these guys. They call themselves the Ancients. We don't really know what's going on with them. They seem to also be vampires, but they're not digging what the Master's doing. So it's like, is he a rogue version from them? So that's interesting, but I don't know if that's going to be enough to get me to come back next season. But really, very much like The Walking Dead, I feel like I've seen all this before and it had the potential to do something much more interesting. Now, maybe if you're not as steeped in vampire movies as I am, maybe it'll be new to you. Maybe it'll be fresh to you and it'll be interesting. But for me, who's seen this stuff before, it feels like a retread. It's a mashup of a couple different things, but it's all stuff I've already seen. And it's presented well enough that it wouldn't frustrate me so much if it didn't keep dangling more interesting ideas and then doing nothing with them. So while I am somewhat intrigued by the stuff with the Ancients and where it's going to go next season, I don't think I trust this show enough to do anything interesting with that idea because I've seen them blow too many interesting possibilities already. Like I said, I kind of have to compare it to Walking Dead. Most of the people I know who really dig The Walking Dead are people who have not seen a ton of zombie films. I have, so I feel like I've seen pretty much everything The Walking Dead has to offer me, and I feel the same about The Strain. So if vampires are more of a peripheral thing to you, if you haven't seen a ton of scary vampire movies, well, you know what? This may work for you, but if you're anything like me at all, there are better ways to spend 13 hours of your life. So let's try and end this on an upbeat. What is your favorite scary vampire film or TV show? Whatever it is, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Until next time, this council is adjourned.